In the galaxy's farthest reaches, humans were barely a whisper. Among the thousands of species, they were seen as chaotic, unpredictable, and primitive. They were known for their wars, their unpredictable emotions, and their capacity for destruction, and because of that, the rest of the galaxy wanted little to do with them. In the grand scheme of interstellar politics, humanity barely registered, a race to be tolerated, not respected. Their presence in high-ranking galactic affairs was non-existent, and when it came to the grand arenas, where the strongest warriors from across the stars gathered to prove their might, humans were never even considered. But this time was different. The intergalactic combat tournament was the pinnacle of physical and mental prowess, a stage for the elite. It wasn't just about strength, it was about dominance, about proving which species reigned supreme. And this year, the tournament had an unexpected participant, Julia Kane, a human mercenary. Her name had rippled through the underground circuits, but to most in the galaxy, she was just another human, and that alone made her unworthy in their eyes. From the moment Julia stepped off her ship, the stairs followed her, every eye sizing her up, calculating her worth, and finding it lacking. Whispers followed her steps, growing louder as she approached the registration booth. The aliens present were a mix of massive, armored species, some with weapons integrated into their bodies, others with advanced tech woven into their biology. They towered over her, each one a testament to the evolutionary superiority of their kind. The moment her name flashed on the entry list, the laughter began. Some of the warriors couldn't even contain themselves, openly guffawing. A human? In this tournament? A large reptilian creature with metallic scales hissed, mocking her. She's here to amuse us. Watch her get crushed in the first round. Alien commentators, broadcasting to their own races, fed the frenzy. Humans, of course, known for their short tempers and lack of control, have sent one of their own to embarrass themselves further, one said, his voice dripping with contempt. They had already decided her fate, defeat. Julia heard it all, felt the weight of their stares, the sting of their words, but she didn't flinch. Her expression remained calm, her resolve unmoved. If anything, it fueled her fire. This was what she came for. She wasn't just fighting for herself, she was fighting for every human who had ever been sneered at, for every time her species had been dismissed as inferior. Her first match was against an enormous alien, a member of a race known for their brute strength and advanced technological enhancements. He towered over her, nearly twice her size, and was covered in armor that glistened with an energy field. As they entered the arena, the crowd roared with laughter. To them, it was obvious how this would end. A human had no chance against an opponent with such strength and advanced tech. Julia stood still as the fight began, sizing him up. The alien charged, his speed betraying his size. He swung a massive fist at her, aiming to end the fight in a single blow. But Julia wasn't there. In an instant, she had sidestepped the strike, her small frame easily dodging the brute's attack. She moved with a fluidity that no one expected. The crowd's laughter turned to confused murmurs as she continued to evade the alien's relentless assaults, her agility keeping her one step ahead. It wasn't just her speed, though. Julia was studying him, reading his movements, calculating his weaknesses. The alien's strength was undeniable, but it also made him predictable. After another wild swing, she found her opening. Julia dashed in, striking key points on his body, places where the armor was weak, where his alien anatomy was most vulnerable. Her strikes were fast, precise, and devastating. The alien warrior stumbled, his massive form crashing to the ground. Julia stood over him, her breathing steady, her eyes cold and focused. The crowd, still trying to process what had just happened, fell silent. No one had expected this. She had won, and not just by chance. She had outmaneuvered and outthought her opponent. But even then, the disbelief remained. They dismissed her victory as a fluke, as luck. Just wait until the next round, some muttered. She won't last. But she did. Match after match, Julia continued to prove herself. She faced aliens who could manipulate energy, others who were masters of telekinesis, and each time, she adapted. Her fighting style wasn't just about raw power, it was about intelligence, adaptability, and precision. She turned her opponent's strengths into weaknesses. Where others relied on brute force or advanced technology, Julia relied on her instincts, on her ability to see what others missed. The mockery didn't stop, though. Even as she won battle after battle, the sneers turned from laughter to something more insidious. They couldn't understand how a human was achieving this, so they began to downplay her victories. "She's lucky," they said. "It won't last." But in their doubt, something else started to form, a fear that maybe they had misjudged her. The jeers grew quieter with each victory, replaced by whispers of unease. Some of the competitors began watching her matches closely, studying her movements, trying to understand how she was beating opponents far more advanced and powerful than herself. The disbelief in the crowd slowly shifted to uneasy curiosity. Julia, though, remained focused. She knew what was at stake. She wasn't just fighting for herself, she was fighting for every human who had ever been looked down upon, every time her species had been mocked and dismissed. Her determination burned brighter with each match, and though she faced internal doubts, they never swayed her from her goal. As she moved through the tournament, the memories of her past flickered in her mind. She remembered growing up on Earth, always underestimated, always fighting to prove herself. Even in her early mercenary days, she had faced the same condescension. Humanity's history of chaos and violence had painted them as a species that couldn't be trusted, as a people who couldn't rise above their baser instincts. But Julia had always known there was more to her species, more to herself. Now, here in this arena, she had the chance to show them. To prove, once and for all, that humanity was more than what the galaxy believed. She wasn't here to win their approval. She was here to earn their respect. As she entered the next round, the murmurs of disbelief still echoed in the background. The aliens couldn't accept it, this human, outmaneuvering their best, defeating warriors who had trained for lifetimes. They had expected her to fall in the first match, but now, with each victory, she was shaking the foundation of their arrogance. Yet, despite everything, there was still doubt. They believed she would fail eventually, that her victories were fleeting. But Julia knew better. She had survived worse than this. And she wasn't done yet. As the tournament continued, Julia began to notice something strange. While her victories were turning heads, there was a different kind of attention surrounding her. It wasn't just the usual murmurs of surprise at a human winning, it was something more calculated, more intentional. There were glances exchanged between officials, hushed conversations in the shadows. Her instincts, honed from years of surviving in hostile environments, kicked in. Something wasn't right. One evening, after her latest victory, she overheard a conversation between two tournament organizers. She kept to the shadows, her body tense as she listened. They spoke in hushed tones, their alien voices grating, yet the message was unmistakable. Her participation hadn't been some random inclusion in the tournament. The cartel, a powerful group that had long manipulated galactic events from the shadows, had orchestrated her entry. Julia's presence in the tournament wasn't about giving humanity a chance to prove itself. It was part of a larger plan, a spectacle designed to humiliate humans on a galactic scale. The cartel's plan was simple. They knew humanity's reputation as unpredictable, chaotic, and primitive. By placing a human in the tournament, they expected her to fail miserably, reinforcing the galaxy's low opinion of her species. The entire galaxy was watching, and her defeat was meant to be a public display of humanity's inferiority. It wasn't just about this tournament, it was about ensuring that humans remained subjugated, never allowed to rise beyond their status as a second-rate species. Her losses would send a message that would resonate across the stars. Humans didn't belong among the galaxy's elite. The realization hit Julia like a punch to the gut. She had thought she was fighting for personal glory, to prove herself and earn respect. But now, it was so much more than that. This wasn't just a fight for her own honor, this was a fight for the dignity of her entire species. The cartel had underestimated her, believing she would fail as others had before. But they were wrong. They didn't know her. They didn't know the fire that burned inside her, the stubborn resilience that had gotten her through every impossible situation. Anger surged through her. She had been used, a pawn in someone else's game. But that wasn't what infuriated her the most. It was the realization that they had planned to humiliate not just her, but her entire race. They believed they could continue to treat humans as insignificant, as nothing more than a joke. Julia clenched her fists. That wasn't going to happen. Not now. Not ever. She knew that every victory from this point on wasn't just a step toward winning the tournament. Every opponent she defeated was a direct blow to the cartel's plan, a strike against their manipulation. With each fight, she wasn't just proving herself, she was dismantling the foundation of their plot. They wanted to see her fail. She would make them regret ever bringing her into this arena. As she prepared for the next round, Julia's mind drifted to her training. Her journey to this point had been long and brutal, filled with challenges and failures that had shaped her into the fighter she was now. She had learned to push through pain, to outthink enemies who were stronger and faster than her. Her childhood on Earth had been one of constant struggle. Even as a mercenary, she had always been underestimated. But that only made her stronger. She remembered those early days when she had to fight for every scrap of respect. Time and again, people assumed she wouldn't last, that she would fall in the face of overwhelming odds. But every failure, every setback had only sharpened her skills, hardened her resolve. It was why she was here, why she would win. Humans were survivors. They adapted, they fought back, and they didn't stop until the job was done. Her next opponent wasn't going to make it easy. The cartel, sensing that Julia was becoming a real threat, had handpicked a fighter to take her down. This was no ordinary opponent. He was massive, even compared to the others she had faced. His armor gleamed with advanced tech, and his reputation as a brutal warrior preceded him. He had crushed countless challengers in past tournaments, and the crowd fully expected him to do the same to Julia. To them, this was the end of her streak. As they stood across from each other in the arena, the tension was palpable. The crowd buzzed with anticipation, eagerly waiting for the moment when this towering alien would crush the human who had, so far, defied all expectations. The organizers watched closely, the cartel's invisible hand guiding this moment. They believed they had set the perfect trap. The fight began, and it was immediately clear that this opponent was different. He wasn't just strong, he was precise, calculating, and utterly merciless. He attacked with the intent to end the fight quickly, aiming to overwhelm Julia with sheer force. His strikes were powerful enough to shatter the ground beneath them, and the crowd roared as he pursued her relentlessly. But Julia was ready. She had been here before, facing opponents who seemed unbeatable. She dodged his first few strikes, feeling the air ripple as his fists came dangerously close. His movements were fast for his size, but Julia's agility allowed her to stay just out of reach. As the fight wore on, it became clear that brute strength alone wasn't going to beat her. She began studying his movements, watching for patterns, for the slightest hesitation. He was armored, yes, but armor had weak points, places where joints met, where tech connected to flesh. She had seen it before in other fights, and she knew that no matter how advanced the armor, it could be exploited. Her opponent's arrogance was his greatest weakness. He believed he had already won, that it was only a matter of time before she fell. In a sudden flurry of motion, Julia struck. She moved in close, dodging one of his heavy blows and delivering a quick series of strikes to his vulnerable points. It wasn't enough to bring him down, but it was enough to stagger him. The crowd gasped, their confidence in the alien's victory wavering for the first time. But her opponent wasn't done. Enraged by the sudden shift in the battle, he came at her with renewed fury, and this time, his strikes landed. Julia felt the impact as she was thrown across the arena, pain shooting through her body. Blood dripped from a cut above her eye, and her breath came in ragged gasps. For a moment, the crowd cheered again, sensing the end was near. But Julia wasn't out yet. Gritting her teeth, she pushed herself to her feet. Pain was nothing new to her. She had fought through worse. And she wasn't going to give the cartel the satisfaction of seeing her fall. Her mind raced, analyzing every detail of the fight. She had seen enough now. She knew his movements, his rhythms, and most importantly, she had found the opening she needed. As the alien charged for what he believed would be the final strike, Julia moved with a precision that stunned the crowd. She ducked under his arm, sidestepped a follow-up blow, and in a split second, delivered a devastating strike to his exposed side. The alien staggered, his armor sparking from the impact. Julia didn't give him a chance to recover. She moved again, faster than anyone expected, striking him in the same spot until his armor gave way completely. With a final blow, the towering warrior fell to the ground. The arena went silent. No one had expected this outcome. Julia stood over her fallen opponent, breathing hard, blood still dripping down her face, but victorious. The crowd, once so sure of her defeat, was now in shock. Whispers spread like wildfire. What was happening here? How could a human, of all beings, defeat an opponent like this? And if she could do this, what else were humans capable of? Julia looked up, meeting the eyes of the organizers who had orchestrated her downfall. She had sent them a message. She wasn't just fighting for herself, and she wasn't going to stop. They had tried to use her to humiliate humanity, but now, she was turning their plan against them. She wasn't just a participant anymore, she was a threat. The final round had arrived, and the entire galaxy was watching. Julia Kane stood alone in the center of the arena, her eyes focused, her body bruised but still ready. Her opponent was no ordinary fighter. He was the warlord, a legend across the stars, feared not just for his strength but for the brutality with which he had crushed every opponent. He had earned his reputation through blood and conquest. His victories spread across the galaxy like dark whispers. The warlord entered the arena to a deafening roar. His presence was a force of nature, his towering frame covered in jagged armor, with scars marking countless battles. His very name struck fear into the hearts of most. As he approached, his eyes locked onto Julia, and a smirk spread across his face. To him, she was nothing more than a minor inconvenience, a human who had somehow stumbled her way into the final round by sheer luck. He made that clear in his taunts, dismissing her victories as flukes, as if she had been lucky to get this far. "Luck won't save you this time," the warlord sneered, his voice a low, menacing growl. "Your kind is weak. You don't belong here. You've fooled these fools, but your game ends now." The air was thick with anticipation. The crowd was eager for what they believed would be Julia's downfall. After all, no one could defeat the warlord. This was expected to be the final act in what had been, to them, a mere sideshow. They couldn't imagine a human standing against one of the galaxy's most brutal fighters. As the fight began, the tension was palpable. The warlord wasted no time. He charged at Julia with a speed that belied his massive size, swinging his powerful fists with enough force to shatter stone. Julia barely managed to dodge the first strike, feeling the air shift as his fist missed her by inches. His strength was terrifying, and for a moment, it seemed as if the fight would be over before it even started. Julia felt the sheer force of his attacks, every blow meant to crush her, and she knew immediately that brute strength alone would never win this battle. But she had never relied on brute force. That wasn't what had gotten her this far. As the warlord continued his relentless assault, Julia dodged and weaved, relying on her agility and quick reflexes. Each strike from the warlord shook the ground beneath them, but Julia stayed ahead of him, never letting him land a clean hit. Her mind raced as she analyzed his movements, looking for patterns, searching for the slightest weakness. She could feel the crowd's growing impatience, the anticipation of her inevitable defeat hanging in the air. But as the fight wore on, something began to shift. The warlord, confident in his strength, grew more aggressive, swinging harder and faster, but also more recklessly. His arrogance, the belief that no one could match him, began to show. Julia saw it. He was used to winning quickly, overpowering his enemies with sheer force. He wasn't used to someone dodging, to someone surviving this long. His frustration was starting to show. Julia knew this was her chance. She couldn't overpower him, but she could outthink him. As the warlord swung wildly, Julia feigned a stumble, making herself look vulnerable, just for a moment. The warlord took the bait, lunging at her with all his might, aiming to finish her off with one final blow. But Julia was ready. She rolled to the side at the last second, and in one fluid motion, she struck, precisely, with calculated force, hitting the weak points in his armor that she had been studying all along. The warlord roared in pain, stumbling back. Julia didn't give him a chance to recover. She pressed her advantage, striking again and again at the same weak spots, her speed and precision overwhelming him. Each blow chipped away at his defenses, and with every strike, the warlord's arrogance crumbled. He had underestimated her, just as everyone else had, and now, it was too late. In the final moments of the fight, the warlord, visibly weakened, swung one last time in desperation. But Julia was already inside his guard. With one final, decisive strike, she hit a vulnerable point in his chest armor, and the warlord collapsed to the ground, his massive body shaking the arena. The crowd, once roaring with confidence in his victory, fell into stunned silence. No one had expected this. The warlord, feared across the galaxy, had been defeated not by strength, but by intelligence, strategy, and sheer determination. Julia stood over him, breathing heavily but victorious. The galaxy had never seen anything like this. A human, once mocked and dismissed, had just taken down one of the most feared warriors in the known universe. For a moment, the entire arena was frozen in disbelief. Then, slowly, the reality of what had just happened began to sink in. Whispers spread through the crowd, growing louder as the shock gave way to realization. Julia Kane had just changed everything. Her victory was more than just a personal triumph. It sent shockwaves through the galaxy. For too long, humans had been seen as weak, as inferior. But now, with Julia's victory, those perceptions were being shattered. She had proven that humanity wasn't to be underestimated, that their strength wasn't in brute force or advanced technology, but in their resilience, their adaptability, and their ability to outthink even the most powerful opponents. Word of her victory spread quickly. Across the stars, the news of a human defeating the warlord reached every corner of the galaxy. The cartel, who had orchestrated the tournament with the intent of humiliating humanity, was forced to retreat. Their plot had been exposed, and the very thing they had tried to prevent, the rise of humanity, was now unstoppable. No longer could they control the narrative. No longer could they keep humans in the shadows. Julia had become a symbol, not just for humans, but for anyone who had ever been underestimated, for any species that had been told they didn't belong. She had shown the galaxy that strength didn't come from size or power alone. It came from will, from intelligence, from the refusal to give up, no matter the odds. As she left the arena, the weight of her victory settled on her shoulders. This was more than she had ever anticipated. She had entered the tournament to prove herself, but she had ended up changing the future of her entire species. She knew that things would never be the same after this. The galaxy had been watching, and now they knew the truth about humanity. But for Julia, this wasn't about glory or fame. It was about respect. It was about proving that humans had a place among the stars, that they were more than the galaxy had given them credit for. As she walked away from the arena, she carried with her the knowledge that she had done what no one thought possible, not through brute force, but through strategy, through resilience, and through an unwavering belief in herself and her people. The galaxy's perception of humanity had shifted, and Julia Kane had made sure that it would never be the same again.